economy. It influences our very lives as individuals and as members of the world community. Here to show us how business can be for the common good, the President and CEO of 8990 Holdings Incorporated, Mr. Jesus Atencio III.
This is the first time I've been introduced as Iron Man. I don't know if I can do justice to that. I want to thank Malu for inviting me to share with you what the company is all about and what we're doing in order for us to become relevant in today's society. What I want to do in my presentation is to give you an overview of what housing has been since 1965 when we talked about housing reforms. And then after that, then I will tell you about certain ideas which we have, certain ideas and moves that we have made in order to make mass housing relevant for us. And so the topic, the pegs are business, common good. I heard about authenticity as well as passion, as well as integrity. All these things need to be present in any business. For us, the company, headed by 3 people, have been in the business for 85 years of combined experience. I'm the CEO, being the youngest one of them all. I only have 22 years of experience building mass housing subdivisions in the country. It was just a few years after I met Malu in the Philippine Senate. But we've always believed in one thing, and that is this. More than building houses, we think our business is really all about using mass housing as a vehicle by which we can add value to society and as a result, use housing to transform people's lives for the better. We think that there are many products and services in this country. Mass housing has one of the longest propositions for business. In other words, we don't buy housing like we go into a department store or a sari-sari store or a supermarket. There are many emotions, there are many things that we consider when we buy this, including our perspective of what we are now and what we hope to be, not only as a family, but also as a society. I've always realized that mass housing sales somehow is dependent on GDP, because people will have to be positive and they have to be feeling good about themselves in order to buy a house today, so that they will continue for this in 25 years. You do not buy a house if you are not sure of the future, not only of yourself, but also of the country where your house will be residing in. One of the things we also understand is this, is that we don't focus on the money as a business. We think that money is merely a byproduct. What we consider to be most important, and this is authentic, is that you consider adding value to your product or to your service. And once the people understand, and this is important, when the people understand through communication and through public relations what it is and what it means to have this product in the market, and when they buy it, then the closer you are to your authenticity of your vision, then the more people will now buy your product, and therefore profits are a mere byproduct of that success. Am I making sense? Just wanted to check whether you're here. Let me now go through very briefly so that we can have a framework. We've always been talking about housing. We actually know that housing is a great catalyst for the economy. And we've been talking about reform so that all Filipinos can have a house they can call their own. 1965, we had the great dictator, and he did so many things. Human settlements, blessed housing, Board of Investments, National Home Mortgage, Home Development Mutual Fund, even the accreditation for housing technology. And so many other things, succeeded by the lovely housewife who made HUD-C, NHA, NHMFC, HGC, and all the shelter agencies, made the local government code more responsive to the housing needs, and she actually created the investment priorities plan. Important because today, mass housing is part of the investment priorities plan. We go to the handsome general, who did the National Shelter Program, who did the Unified Home Lending Program, did so many laws, including RA 7279, that actually made it mandatory for developers to do socialized housing wherever you are, whoever you are in the Philippines. The other handsome actor, maybe he didn't stay too long because he only had the multi-window housing program and Executive Order 90, which provided streamlining of processes and permits for housing. You have here just 4 presidents, all the reforms that are happening. It wasn't well enough because the beautiful economist did everything as well to reform the industry. You have the Pag-ibig developer originated finance. You had mass housing inside the investment priorities plan. We relocated the illegal or the informal settlers in the PNR. We increased the socialized housing limit. We have the gentleman who would be ex-president. HDMF originated credit scoring as a response to HDMF developer originated finance. He increased the ceilings for socialized and low-cost housing. He even had extended the rent control. The point being, ladies and gentlemen, is that we have been doing housing reforms for the past 50 years. Why are we talking about the same problem in 2015? And these are the kind of comments that you would receive. It's barely improved, it's unsustainable, all sorts of chatter that you will see in not only in social media but in highly publicized economic treaties and presentation materials. Unlike the one in the middle called PPP, so there have been, and it doesn't mean PowerPoint presentation. It means that there has been a lot of public and private-oriented housing programs. But again, what they're saying is that it's barely improved, etc. So, is the Filipino just a basher? Is also a question. We've actually done everything. I think the question is not so much what reforms we need and how to communicate it, but what haven't we done? What haven't we done in order to improve housing in this country? What I will say is this, and this is my personal take. Perhaps we should look at it from the beneficiaries or the intended audience's point of view. I think that's what public relations is also all about, is to try to get a message across, but with the idea of making it relevant to the kind of target audience. And maybe housing policy should actually do the same. It should actually first look at the people that it intends to benefit. My idea is this: a truly effective and sustainable mass housing program, it's got to be grounded on, based on the understanding of the reality and the psychology of how a typical Filipino family, how they live, how they earn, how they spend their money today. What they're saying, for example, in the relocation programs we have, is that people come back because their work is actually very far from the relocation sites. And I'm asking them, if it's housing for the poor and they have jobs, then why consider them poor in the first place? And maybe the simple solution there is actually just to give them shuttle services. But it all boils down to this. It boils down to, we've got to know our market and we've got to know them intimately. I would even go one step further and say not only do you have to know your market, you've got to love your market. And there's really a big difference between knowing and loving. So first you have the idea of awareness, and then you have the idea of liking, and then you have the idea of loving enough. Well, in the case of a political scenario, loving enough to vote for the candidate. So know your customer really well, and this is what we've done as a housing company. We have evolved our policies and our programs to reflect our realizations on what this market really is and what it stands for, what its aspirations are, and more importantly, what are the realities when facing a market for mass housing. We feel that this market is, number one, it's deeply aspirational. There is this burning desire, therefore, to move from one status of life, which is called the renter class, and to move upward into an asset-owning class. And that power and that aspiration is so strong. It is strong enough for the spouse to actually leave the country, leave behind his family, to find work abroad, so that he can have enough money to come back and fulfill that dream of owning land, among many other dreams. But they're also practical, and they have value for money. In other words, low cost cannot and doesn't mean low value. And therefore, the challenge for low-cost developers like me is how to actually maintain a price tag that can be affordable and yet load that product with so many values as to make the perception and the reality of this house high value. They're also optimistic about their future. One of the years or the era when we had the lowest sales was during the dark days when President Estrada was being tried in the Senate. Why? Because people there simply just postponed housing purchases. Why? Because they weren't optimistic about the future. If that was happening today, people will say, now why should I buy a house, okay, with a 25-year payment proposition when next month I could easily decide to go abroad because the situation in the Philippines is getting worse. Housing is one of the very few products that carry with it this kind of long-term proposition. And so we rise and fall with the positive or the negative perception of society and positive growth. We rise with positive growth. Now that it cannot be denied that the Philippines has been growing since 10 years or more ago, and therefore this growth has trickled down to our market. That is why we're now experiencing better returns. We're now experiencing higher growth sales. But the question is this: because the average working everyday Filipino has money in its pocket, we feel the obligation to educate the market in order for them to understand what best options they have for consumption and purchases. This is our market, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, 8990 or Deca homes, we don't do housing for the poor. Okay, that is a challenge that keeps us awake and that keeps us forever devising a product that can sell to that market and in a way gives us very fair returns. Our market is young. They're all college educated. They've got stable jobs. what is typical of the Filipino family now is that they've got other income as well. We actually require 35,000 monthly gross family income as a minimum to actually get a house from us. This is important. They're renters. They're not asset owners. And therefore, the education that is required when you move up to become an asset owner or a landed, so to speak, a landed family becomes important. This is important as well. This market has little or no savings. Therefore, it doesn't make sense to me what my other friends in the industry are doing, which is basically in-house finance, charge 20% down payment. Because on one hand, you have the reality of the mass market having to pay rent. And on the other hand, you are now forcing the market to change its budget to a certain extent as to comply with a monthly amortization on a down payment for the next 1 or 2 years on a house you don't even own, or worse, you can't even live in. And therefore, the reality and the authenticity is this. Instead of helping this market achieve their aspiration of owning a house, you actually are burdening them by asking for a down payment. What is real is this, is that on one hand, the industry is asking for a 20% down payment from the buyer before the house is built. But if you look at it from the other equation, what is the percentage of down payment that the contractor is asking the developer? It's also 20%. 20% from the left and 20% on the right. That's not astronomical or astrophysics. You can do the math and find out what it's all about. I say this because one of the innovations we've made, knowing about this market, is to charge only a 4% down payment. And innovations like this has made all the difference in our business model. Let me show this to you now. There are just 3 components to our business model. But we have to realize that these are synchronized, these are complementary, and these are synergistic. You cannot just pick one aspect and comment on it because it works as a whole. These components have to work together. Okay, and so we have these 3 components. Let me now show what these 3 components are. You have a fast construction. I can do a house in 8 days. Why? Because the market needs to move in quickly. Okay, this is not the second home or the investment market. This market wants to move up and move out of the rented apartment, or even better, move out of their in-laws' house. We actually have in-house finance that is accessible, and this one I'm saying 2 to 4% equity. We have the lowest interest rate at 9.5. Why? Because I already make money from the profit margin of the house. You know, one of the mistakes that many developers have is they try to cut this market many ways. But the more you cut this market, the more it becomes riskier for them when they start allocating their budget to pay for a monthly amortization. And so I try to make my in-house finance really the most accessible way by which they can do this. I charge 2 to 4% equity only because I need some coverage for risk, but I shouldn't make so much money out of it. The last part is this, and this is what ties it all together. And I think this is the reason why most housing programs in the Philippines have failed. It's because we need to invest in a proactive credit and collection platform. We have this, and we emphasize behavior modification more than just collection. We believe that with education, you can now change the mentality of your buyer to understand not only what he has to pay, but most importantly, why he needs to pay it. And why does he need to pay? Because we realize that we're not just selling shelter. We're actually selling our buyers a way for financial security and freedom 10 or 20 years from now. because the product that he has. That means lowering the barrier of entry so that many businessmen who want to actually venture in the mass housing business can do so. The problem today is that the barriers of entry have become much, much higher than when I started out 20 years ago. It's now much harder to actually start a mass housing business. And therefore, if we can go back to the time when permits could be simplified, permits could be done in a faster period of time, then you will see a lot more people coming into this market. You know, as of today, NEDA has estimated a mass housing backlog of 4.2 million, and it's growing at 5.5% per year. What was the industry supply last year in 2014? 220,000. So you know that as the population grows, you will have more and more demand for these kinds of housing. And so that's it. For me, build more houses, get a technology. You know, what the government needs to do in order to build up house to make housing faster is to create a factory using precast technology, which is what I do. I can build a house in 8 days.
Wow.
I have a film, if you're interested. But you know, I can build it. See, that's not so astronomical now, because in China they have this technology that can build a house in 1 day. It's called 3D printing.
So how many?
But of course, that's China, right? If it's not made from God, it's probably made in China.
That's a good one. So,
Nowadays.
natawa ako dun. JJ, what is your inventory now in terms of housing that you 8890 has?
Okay, we have now a capacity to do 15,000. Unfortunately, my inventory is down to 240 in one project in Angeles City. Okay,
240,000 homes?
240 pieces, units. So in other words, I cannot keep up with my demand. That's a problem now.
That's a pleasant problem, right?
And that is why looking forward, I think it's not so much the market, because the market is there. The challenge of businesses like me is to make sure that I become present in the markets. It's not like most fast consumer goods. You can just distribute this anywhere in the country immediately. Diba? From potato chips to shampoo and jeans. It's easy. It's a distribution issue. For housing, you've got to be in the location. For example, I have a project in Iloilo. We don't want to buy in Iloilo, right? And therefore, I need to be close to you, physically, literally. And so that's one of the challenges. In order for a company like us to actually do a significant effort to decrease demand for housing by increasing supply, I've got to put up more branches nationwide.
And you are now present in how many?
We're present in 7 areas. In Luzon, we have in Angeles, NCR, and Cavite. In the Visayas, we're in Iloilo and Cebu. In Mindanao, we're in Davao and General Santos.
So you're saying that the choke point for you to be successful and to address the issue of the lack of housing for a specific niche market is government, or the
Well, the government can help, but the government has diba, it's very busy because it has so many problems to consider, diba? And you know, we're not even talking about political problems, diba? We're talking about social problems. Sama yung political problems, and so sometimes that's like 80% of the concentration is. But anyway, and therefore what the industry wants is number one, a level playing field, and number two, not too much bureaucracy. If the government can do that, then business can come in, they can build the houses, diba? And you know, and if the government incentives for housing continue, then we can actually have products that have more value and at a lower price. I have to say, when I talk about low cost and high value, this is what I mean. My product is precast technology. It can withstand 7.9 earthquakes according to a certificate which I received from Philbox. It's very strong, it's very solid. And then I've incorporated wakeboard parks as part of my amenities in my mass housing subdivision.
Wakeboard parks.
Wakeboard parks. The only other developer to do this is Ayala. But it can be done, that's what I'm saying. Low cost need not mean low value. Okay?
Right.
And there are many economic things that you can do. You can average cost down, all these things that we learn in school can actually be applied.
And with the interest rates being low and as low as they are for many years now, it really is an opportune time for people to buy housing at different levels.
I've always been asked, when is the right time to buy a property? I'm saying that any time is good. Now is good. And then people ask me also, when is it time to sell my property? I'm saying now is good. Why? Because if you notice, the trend of real estate prices in the Philippines is going up. Okay, and Hong Kong, Singapore, to a certain extent, KL. Why do they have all these high-end shops with all these designer brands? Because no matter how much disposable income they have, buying real estate in their country is such a far-flung idea.
Impossible.
It's almost impossible for a Singaporean executive to buy a property in Singapore, no matter how much. And therefore, they have so much disposable income, they start buying all these nice cars. And, the Philippines is very fortunate because of companies like us, mass housing. The average working Filipino family can buy real estate. And therefore, today, when let's say pag-ibig loan prices for interest are low at 6.5, use your pag-ibig, buy a property that you like. Because I will tell you, the way 100 million Filipinos growing at a population rate of like 3.5%, in 10 years time, this 1 million peso property that you bought can easily be 5.
Yeah, and going back to that, and going back to the theme of ASEAN integration this morning, we've had a few speakers talk about ASEAN integration. And earlier on, you talked about shelter equating to financial security. How do you think 8090 can provide security, given that part of ASEAN integration's purpose is economic affluence?
The thing with real estate is that it's fixed. And therefore, influx of goods, well, I can only see that ASEAN integration will be better because we can now have a lot more construction materials, therefore making the input prices competitive. I don't see Singaporeans coming in to buy real estate in the Philippines. I think it's the reverse is true. I think Filipinos want to have safe havens abroad. I think that what will benefit is, for example, in terms of labor, then we might be able to hire engineers from the ASEAN. Okay, and so while we are exporting our engineers and losing engineers ever since to places like Singapore, then I can get some ASEAN engineers to work in the Philippines, which is ironic, don't you think?
True, I agree.
We just exchanged engineers.
True, I agree about that. Can we have a few questions from our friends out there? It seems that the lack of proper and effective space planning continue to challenge sustainable mass housing initiatives. What can be done to address this, and what can PR do to help?
You can break it down into components or into phases. But the thing about government sometimes is that it's too focused on macro, but you break it down. How much housing does Metro Manila need, for example? And then you proceed to build it. The thing about all these national programs is that they have a tendency to fall on its own way. You say it's big, diba? And if you think a shelter program for Metro Manila / NCR is too big, then let's say housing program for the east of Metro Manila. And so what can we do there? PR is important because at the end of the day, it's all about communication. One of the things that we do, as of now, I'm the only developer I know who does it, is that before my buyers can buy, they're subjected to a half-day orientation seminar. Therefore, it's part of my advocacy is education. I need to educate my buyers in order to find out what it's all about. You know, when you're buying real estate, it's not so simple. Okay, there's a long-term commitment. So we teach them how to properly manage their finances. Part of this orientation seminar, my buyers are subjected to a budgeting exercise from the household level, so that they can see that, oh, ma'am, if you don't drink Starbucks every day, but maybe 3 times a week, then you can have some money saved up for a month amortization. Things like that, with apologies to Starbucks. Diba? But you see, consumption can be two ways. You can, now that people have more money, admittedly, let's admit it, people have now more money than say 10 or 5 years ago. I mean, with all the bashing that's been happening to our country, I think we can say that, you know, the Filipinos are better off now. In fact, the ordinary Filipinos are good. So you have two income streams. You have consumption that is depreciating and consumption that is appreciating. Diba? And therefore, government should also make sure that consumption is geared towards more investment. Investments in, for example, equities, investments in mutual funds, investments in real estate. Diba? So that at the end of the day, even your OFWs who come back, diba, then they'll have something to show for it in terms of real property purchase. The thing about consumption is this: after a while, if you buy all these cell phones, will that cell phone purchase make you rich? Versus if you pull all of that and you buy real estate, in 5 or 10 years' time, will this investment make you a millionaire?
I'm curious to know, how much is your average
My
price?
average for the first semester 2015 package price, 960,000 house and lot.
How many square meters is that?
Okay, in Angeles, it can be a 50 square meter with a 25 square meter footprint, so it's 2 floors, on a 53 square meter lot. That's a terrace, or terrace. That's what they call that kind of housing abroad in Europe. Terrace housing. Here it's called townhouse, row house. Maganda pakinggan yung terrace. Okay, and then we have single attached units. That's about 1.1 million in Angeles. And Cavite, I think it's 980,000.
And you see that there's really a lot of demand for it. So you said earlier, you can't build fast enough for the demand.
I think there's demand for mass housing. A lot of the developers kasi now, they focus on mid-cost. They buy condominiums, then they get, you know, all these endorsers and pay them. What I do is that I get all my advertising and then funnel it into values that my buyers can appreciate, like wakeboard parks. What I'm saying is that I have 2 wakeboard parks. I will have a 3rd one in Visayas. I have already in the north, in Angeles. I have 1 in Mindanao. Basically, what I'm saying is that if you're my homeowner, you can use any of these facilities, including the swimming pools, clubhouses, a lot of basketball courts, and more basketball courts. And then the way you can use all of them for free if you're current with your monthly amortization.
And the monthly amortization, I'm just curious. The monthly amortization is what?
Anywhere from 6,000 to 8,000, depending on where you get it.
Wow. It's pretty good. Okay.
Yeah, so it's a volume game. I think moving forward, our company is not so much concentrated in creating a market, because the market is there. As I said, for the Philippines and for this country, what will be significant towards the long term is the ability to simply produce more and more houses.
Scale.
Yes, you need to scale that.
I think we have another question. Why the name 8990?
Ladies and gentlemen, sige, I will tell you the truth.
You're born in 1989.
We were named after a Nokia cell phone model.
I remember that model, in fact.
Yeah,
But why?
This was this small, di ba? Yung uso yun eh. No, because when we were incorporating, we submitted 40 names to the SEC. Okay, all of those names were disapproved. Until my partner, Luis, he said, Jay, we've run out of, it's not easy to make a name, as you know. So he said, why don't we just name it after your cell phone and be done with it? We had a good laugh. We called it 8990 because the cell phone model was 8890. Diba? So, the thing is, baka may copyright rules pa yan. Diba? Baka hindi pumayag yung PR namin. Kasi, so we said 89. Guess what? It was approved. And so maybe those numbers are lucky for us.
Good. That's a good one. Are there any more questions?
I